there was a lot of talk that GDA personnel were in the command post for that. However, it was all Air Force blue suits doing the,
or white suits.
In essence, yeah, doing the launch.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you have that, and then the other one, I mean, the real popular one, of course, was at 576B. And that's when Quick Start, April 22nd, 6th. I mean, it was kind of interesting. If I'm not mistaken, Khrushchev was on the train coming down the west coast of the United States.
That's cool.
And one of the biggest things, there was the debate of whether they not, the U.S. government wanted him to look out the train window and see one of our missiles launching over the Pacific. I thought it was a great, personally, wow, what a way to give it to them. This is the other side of the coin, ladies and gentlemen,
That's right.
And then, of course, you can go on from there. And then you had, when President Kennedy came out there in March, doggone it, it wasn't one of the 576B sites. But, he was the first standing president to ever see a launch. I make reference to that in Siloworld. I have the original pictures that, can you imagine he's on one of the most secure Air Force bases in the United States military. And believe it or not, they put him in a bubbled limousine. And I made the comment when I got a hold of the original photographs, was like, guy, why wasn't he in that bubble in Dallas?
Yeah.
6 months later, American history truly would have changed.
That's a whole nother rabbit hole.
Oh, exactly.
What
an interesting, I say that often. And what's interesting is I had the photograph of the crew commander of that crew for that launch is handing President Kennedy something.
Yeah.
But you can't make it out, right? And that commander, Simonson, was his name. At the time he was a major. He called me, and he retired as a light colonel.
Damn.
His daughter called me and tracked me down and said, my dad really wants to talk to you.
That's
and
awesome.
I was so honored when he told me who he was because I recognized his name. Yeah. And then he explained, I asked him the question. I said, what were you handing the president? And he was handing President Kennedy a Missileer's badge, a Missile Man's badge.
That's awesome. He looked to be about 40 years old in that picture.
Exactly. And he lived in Kentucky. What an interesting, so it just goes to show you. Again, I know you called it wanting Walker and, all of a sudden we're back on, something like that. But you find that, Bryce, in all of this. I've never seen something so interesting. It's just flat interesting.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how to describe it. We talk about things like it's a small world. Well, it truly is. I believe it, especially with all of this missile stuff that we do.
Yeah.
One door all of a sudden leads to something else that leads to something else.
The community itself.
Here's one that I was just discussing this morning. Our last squadron commander with the 579th was Robert Milner, Colonel Milner. Come to find out, I had tracked down, he's buried at Arlington, his wife's buried in Arlington. I had different photographs, and I tracked down some of he had 3 girls. Well, they all had to be at some point or another, they had to go to high school in Roswell. So I tend to believe we only had one high school at the time. And they all went to Roswell High.
Right.
Well, I really wanted to talk with the daughter to ask specific questions of, what were some of the other ones? Our SATAF commander, Colonel Barrowclug, his son had to be at Roswell High. Well, all these kids lived within a block or two of one another, all right, in the best sections for the leaders of the 6th Bomb Wing at Walker. And so, I just had different questions. Well, to show you what a small world it is, the more I was doing research on Milner, and come to find out, he had graduated from the University of North Carolina.
Nice.
Well,
Chapel Hill.
a dear friend of mine that was our FedEx pilot forever, and is about 15 years older than me. We're just great friends. Well, his father was in the same class as Milner and is in the yearbook with him.
Nice.
Now, talk about a small world.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I know about that. That's Chapel Hill, probably.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And so, when you look at different things, what I'm trying now is, we still have so far to go. Just because none of this stuff is, here's a quick example. To understand who Milner was, Colonel Milner came from the 568, the Titan I sites at Larson in Washington,
nice,
that my grandfather built and all my relatives. Well, I just always found this interesting. They pulled Milner out of Titan I. They had been transferred him somewhere, and I'm not too sure of the wing at the time that was at Fairchild. Moved him from Larson to Fairchild, which is really only 100 miles, and then wound up moving him here. Well, long story short, our second 579th commander was Colonel Alphonse Chalifot. Well, they moved him from the 567th, which was the Atlas E sites, at Fairchild. And I just find this ironic that they're moving them from Atlas E's to an Atlas F. Now, I understand the moving them, but I don't necessarily understand the logic of, if you've been all this time with Atlas E, why in the world do I want to give you a new missile system? And so I've got quite a few questions, but of course, I'm not too sure who's going to be able to answer those questions for me, because most of the originals, Bryce, are gone.
Yeah.
So, how do we, and then of course, when the last site, he happened to be squadron commander when two of our sites blew up, the second and third site, right? Well, obviously after the third one blew, they relieved him.
Yeah.
Well, of course, even though he was relieved from Walker in the 579th, he went on. I would have thought they would have sent him to somewhere like Thule, Greenland, somewhere, they sent him to the Azores. I forget the name of the Air Force base there, but I just thought, wow, that's the way to end your career. Hang out on the beach in the Azores.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
God, it had to be nice,
You have no connection to any missile systems anymore.
Well, look, when Colonel Jaquette, he was our first one, squadron commander. Obviously when Site 1 blew in June of 1963, of course, that was in the day, and SAC was still, it was, you screw up, you're gone. It was that simple. And, of course, they relieved him. What's interesting with Jaquette is that he comes full circle, that when they were shutting down all first-generation sites, he was the man in charge of going around the country trying to bring sources together on what are we going to do with the basing modes, the sites. And it was interesting that Jaquette went on to do that. And in fact, if you look at one of the articles, he wrote basically the article on a lot of the government, on the military salvaging of all first-generation sites, like taking the diesel generators out of Batum, the Titan I site there, okay? He wrote the article regarding that, which was interesting because he was the prior 579th, our first, that was also relieved. Now, what's interesting with him is that he was part of the first Thor group that went to England. So, what an interesting, you look at all these people and you're like going, wow, these guys really had kind of some. If you wanted to go back to World War II, he was one of the B-17 pilots that had just landed in